We are very grateful to have you all here. We'll have a round table in 15 minutes with a very interesting reflection on what it means to think collectively in international security, international critical terrorism and security studies. But first of all, we'll have a short opening address by Raquel Freire. Thank you so much for being with us, Raquel. Working on critical terrorism studies and critical terrorism and security studies in the Iberian Peninsula and internationally. I think Raquel's fame doesn't really need to be presented or to introduce. She's a very, very, very big voice, an insightful voice in international relations. Somehow thinking from the Iberian Peninsula, whatever that means, Raquel, or from the southern part of Europe. Obviously, we know that also in international relations, this doesn't really mean much. But Raquel is a PhD in international relations from the University of Kent, UK. She's a researcher at the Center for Social Studies and professors now of international relations at the Faculty of Economics at the University of Coimbra. She was the coordinator of Jean Monnet Center of Excellence Prone. She held the Jean Monnet Chair at the University of Coimbra. She's currently involved in a research project, Protest, Horizon, and Carson, part of Marie Curie Staff Exchange. And as I was saying, so I think that the work of Raquel, we all know at least some of the things that you've been doing, because it's also very heterogeneous intellectual production. But you have some reflections on international security, feminist perspectives, post-colonial perspectives, that we think that, again, speak very much to the kind of network that we'd like to put together. Also reflection on peace studies, foreign policy, and international security from critical approaches, as I was saying. So, Raquel, thank you so much for being with us. You have approximately 10, 15 minutes. And again, thank you. And I'm very sorry this short bio obviously doesn't make justice to the huge career that you have. All yours is the floor. Thank you, Raquel. I'll stop.
Good morning, everyone. Thanks so much for these initial remarks. So absolutely no pressure, right? It is my pleasure, of course, to join this network launch event this morning. And I do want to thank and also congratulate Raquel and Alice for this invitation and for inviting me also to join this reflection and what will be, I'm sure, a very interesting path. Iberian scholarship in critical terrorism and security studies has indeed grown significantly in recent years, but it remains less visible internationally than it deserves. So our researchers are producing innovative work, but too often in isolation. So I think this network really arrives at exactly the right moment to change this trajectory. So I would like to start by saying that when I got the invitation to join this initiative, it took me back in time as already quite a few years ago, and I can't place this precisely, but it was around 2010. A colleague at University of Minho in Braga, Professor Ana Paula Brandão, whom I'm sure many of you will know and may even have worked with, launched the Portuguese Security Studies Network. It was then called the PTSSN, which aim was to develop the sense of community among researchers in the field of international relations, but with this particular focus on security studies understood broadly. So it included terrorism studies, nuclear studies, human security, schools of thought, such as the Frankfurt School or the Paris School or Aberystwyth, also internal security issues, post-colonial feminists, whatever you want to fit in there. And the network wished to promote cooperation between researchers from different institutions, also coming from different areas and schools of thought, with the goal to project internationally the research that was conducted in Portugal, and of course, to collect and organize information about what was being published, projects that were being developed in the area, and so forth. And in this context, there were quite some seminars and conferences organized, many times using projects that were engaged with promoting the network and trying in this way, right, to create a bit of a collaborative dynamic And this worked quite well for some time, but because this was totally non-institutionalized, there was no self-funding of the network, so it was very much on the basis of the commitment of those involved. And of course, with time, it ended up losing a bit of traction, and this had to do with the people involved and, of course, the overload of work, right? In the midst of so many tasks we are all coping with, it's hard. So it was obviously not the interest or even the development of research work in the field, as it has been growing through the years that led it to fade away, but a bit lack in capacity, right, of those that were most proactive to keep it running without a bit more of a supportive structure. But this created a dynamic somehow, and which I hope this new network might somehow rehash and rebuild. And this new network, focusing on critical terrorism and security studies, is certainly most welcomed. I always feel these initiatives promoting collaborative dynamics, involving researchers, academics, and most of all postgrad students, right? And trying to engage them with the work of senior researchers, helping them to enlarge that networks of contacts. This is so fundamental at an early career stage. And we know it by experience that I really hope this network will absolutely serve this purpose. And from what Alice was saying just in her introductory remarks, this seems to be key and central to the network, which is really, really important. Now moving a bit to the focus of the network and the context of the Iberian Peninsula. I do believe this is a strong starting point, as we are sitting at a strategically significant position, right, that shapes the role we might have in developing and promoting critical terrorism and security studies. As the European Union's southern border, Spain, Portugal serve as critical interlinkages, right, between Europe, North Africa. Let's think about the broader Sahel region. Of course, also beyond this area, but this particular geographic positioning creates unique security dynamics that differ substantially from other European contexts. We might just mention, the debates on the Russian threat throughout the years, even before the start of the war in Ukraine, with Eastern countries assessing Russia's willingness for great powerness as a major threat, and the Southern countries claiming their major threat was coming from the South, not the East. Or if we think of migration routes, transnational networks, the spillover effects of instability in neighboring regions, such as the Sahel, we get this macro picture. But we can also look more targetedly, for example, at the historical legacy of terrorism in Spain. Think of the decades-long campaign by ETA, which provides lessons that still remain relevant today. Its final dissolution in 2018 marked the end of one of Europe's longest-running terrorist campaigns, and the whole experience in managing, negotiating, offers relevant insights for understanding terrorist group dynamics, de-radicalization processes, post-conflict transition. And this is just to illustrate. So if you open think tanks' web pages or search for academic literature, you see all of these very clearly. So there is know-how, and this is mainly the point. Working in critical security, critical terrorism and security studies across both Iberian and international contexts necessarily involves engagement with multiple environments that extend beyond a single region. And here, if we think, for example, of the EU, this provides a primary framework for cooperation. There are mechanisms, we know well, Europol, EU Counterterrorism Coordinator, there are various working groups that create opportunities for policy influence and collaborative research connecting Iberian experiences to broader European approaches. Or NATO partnerships can also provide these. So navigating these EU and NATO frameworks while simultaneously engaging with national security priorities in Spain, Portugal, and of course other countries, provides insights into the challenges of multilateral security, counterterrorism, cooperation, among others. And most of all, having a critical eye on these organizational frameworks, the goals pursued, the targets that are identified is really crucial. Also to put forward needed critical and counter narratives to avoid, for example, overuse of exceptional circumstances as legitimizers of decision-making practices, sometimes at the service of some, as we all know. Also, the linguistic and historical connections between the Iberian Peninsula and Latin America create additional international dimensions. Spanish and Portuguese-speaking diaspora communities create transnational networks that span continents, particularly where organized crime intersects with terrorism financing or where ideological movements transcend national borders. Think about the work we develop with Brazilian colleagues, also dedicated to this field. I'm thinking about the triple border of Brazil, Uruguay, and Argentina, and the multiple works on border security, or differently, the work related to the favelas, to the shanty towns context and networks. These war spaces in formal peace contexts, as we've been hearing in the news, right, among many other topics related to critical terrorism and security studies. Furthermore, the global nature of radicalization processes means that research conducted in the Iberian Peninsula connects directly to efforts in other international contexts, looking at how online networks, ideological currents operate across geographic boundaries, which is most relevant in our days. But doing research in this field is not easy. Accessing sensitive data, taking into account ethical considerations in field work when studying radicalization and violent extremism in diverse settings, and the kind of workshops that Alice was just mentioning in her remarks is really, really important. Or engaging with affected communities in different countries requires navigating different standards of informed consent. We have all been there. Different understandings of potential harm and the risk that research findings could even be misused or contribute to stigmatizations in ways that are different across contexts, even becoming unintended results of our own research. Moreover, growing online radicalization with local variations that require contextual understanding add a layer of complexity, only to become even more complex with development of new technologies. Think about encrypted communication, artificial intelligence, and so on. And of course, the need for attracting funding, which is not always easy, to put it mildly, as we well know. So these challenges are real, but so are the opportunities. And research has grown substantially, with Spanish and Portuguese universities developing strong research programs. What is missing, to my view, more is this collaborative work, both within Portugal and between Portuguese and Spanish researchers. Also at the policy level, we have these think tanks like the Real Instituto Elcano. In Portugal, we have Instituto de Defesa Nacional. And this can also provide interesting settings for collaborative work, particularly when engaging across multiple institutional frameworks and actors with established relations spanning these national counterterrorism structures and international organizations. So the institutional framework is there, but more engaged collaboration could clearly be substantiated. Innovation in counterterrorism represents an emerging opportunity, to my view, particularly when contexts allow for the transfer and adaptation of approaches. The development of artificial intelligence, machine learning tools for threat assessment, the use of social network analysis for understanding extremist networks, the exploration of alternative approaches to community engagement, all these represent areas where work can contribute to methodological and practical innovation through comparative and cross-context analysis. Attention to emerging areas represents a crucial opportunity to contribute to proactive responses. If we think about the climate security nexus, which is increasingly demanding attention with environmental degradation, resource scarcity, climate-induced displacement, creating conditions that can exacerbate instability. This is every day in the news headlines. The evolution of cyberterrorism, hybrid threats requires sustained focus as state and non-state actors increasingly blend conventional and unconventional tactics, exploit digital vulnerabilities, use disinformation campaigns to destabilize societies. This is also very much in the headlines. New forms of extremist ideology require careful monitoring. The role of cryptocurrency in terrorism financing, biosecurity threats, this is all in the agenda. And finally, moving beyond Eurocentric perspectives and engaging with the views and priorities of partners in the global south, to put it simply and broadly, through sustained collaboration is also in high demand. So let me conclude with a reminder of why this network matters and why our active participation matters even more. The geographic, historical, and linguistic positioning of Spain and Portugal, combined with active international engagement, creates this unique basis for research and practice that can clearly bring relevant insights to the broader field. But this potential can only be realized through our collective engagement. I encourage everyone to share your research actively, mentor one another across career stages, and challenge conventional approaches. This is what will make the network thrive. Moving forward, the emphasis must remain on critical, ethical, and collaborative approaches that respect civil liberties, engage diverse perspectives across contexts, and produce academic work that serves both the academic and the policy-making and decision communities internationally. This is both the challenge and the extraordinary opportunity of working in this field across the Iberian Peninsula, and let's put it internationally. So many thanks for your attention, and congratulations again to Raquel and Alice for this timely initiative. I really look forward to seeing this network consolidate and grow. Thank you so much.
Hello, everyone. It's a very big pleasure to be here, and I want to thank especially Raquel Freire for being here, for accepting our invitation, and for leaving so many interesting thoughts, very important thoughts, and also this challenge of actually, being really critical, ethical, and collaborative, which is truly our wish for this network. Thank you so much, Raquel. And actually, in line with what Raquel has been sharing, we now have a roundtable with a set of stellar scholars who we thank already for joining us this morning. And what we asked them was exactly to reflect on collectively imagining critical terrorism and security studies in the Iberian Peninsula, yes, but also internationally. So I will present each one of our contributors this morning, and you will see that they have links to the Iberian Peninsula, or have been conducting this kind of work in other places, and we can learn from them. I should also say that they are very good friends and colleagues too. We've had the pleasure, myself and Alice, of working with them in different projects. So yeah, we know each other well, and it's very heartwarming for us that they accepted our invitation and can be here sharing their reflections with us. So I'll start by introducing each one of them shortly. So today we have with us Itoitz Rodrigo Josué, who is a Vice Chancellor's Independent Research Fellow at Loughborough University in the UK. Her interdisciplinary research examines violence with a focus on media, identities, security, and social change. Itoitz's work, it's very interesting. She has published work that you can go and read, and is very, very inspiring. We also have Carlos Morgado Braz, who is an assistant teacher and director of the bachelor's degree in international relations at Universidade Europeia in Lisbon, and is also a visiting research fellow at the University of South Wales. His work examines security governance, exceptionalism, and post-colonial perspectives on European security imaginaries. He also has interesting work in our far-right party, Chega, here in Portugal, and a forthcoming paper that is very interesting and co-authored with someone was very nice too. Just joking. Then we also have Shirley Aking with us. Shirley is assistant professor in criminal justice at the United States International University, Africa, and executive director of the African Network of Critical Security Scholars. Shirley's award-winning doctoral research explored indigenous African approaches to counterterrorism in Kenya. Shirley has worked with us exactly on these issues, and it's a very big pleasure to have her here with us today, because she has the experience of setting up and running an African network of critical security scholars. And we really want to learn from her experience and her reflections. So thank you so much, Shirley, for being here. And finally, we have Inés Bolano Somoano, who is an eBay fellow in international security at the Instituto Barcelona de Estudios Internacionales. Her research examines the emergence and consolidation of prevention of radicalization and violent extremism as a policy field in the European Union. It's great to have Inés here. It's great also to have seen her her process through the PhD and our postdocs and so on. So it's really fantastic. So this is our set of amazing speakers. Thank you all for being here. And without further ado, I'm just going to go into our first question. So we'll have two rounds of questions for our contributors, and then we'll have a Q&A. So if in the audience you have any questions, so jot them down and you can pose them at the end of these two rounds. So in the first round, we would like to reflect on the meaning and value of collectivity in CTSS. So our question for our speakers is, what does it mean to think collectively in critical terrorism and security studies today? And beyond institutional collaborations or professional networks, how can collective spaces become sites of shared reflection, critique, and imagination in our field? So maybe we can start with the etoids. Maybe we can just follow the order in which I presented people. And then, you have 3 to 4 minutes each, and then we'll go to the second round. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Thank you very much for inviting me to be here. So I think I will first start maybe with the first part of the question, and then I will listen to others, what they have to say, and yeah, maybe I will come up with something else. So I find it quite hard, all these questions, but I mean, reflecting on it, I think that mainly thinking collectively first would go against the logic of academic individualism that focuses on promoting our own contributions to the field, on individualized stories of success, our careers, citation numbers, metrics, how it works. So I think that thinking collectively means recognizing first that knowledge, that everything, our ideas, frameworks, questions, interests, concerns, etc., are always produced with our colleagues in the field in CTS, but also from other fields. Yeah, like the other day I was talking to Alice about how the impact of, for me, queer theory had in my CTS work maybe is not as straightforward to see in the publications, but I feel like that all these readings that I did before, or well, when I was at university doing my degree, really impacted the way that then I developed a more critical work in academia. So yeah, so I think that is acknowledging how like thinkers, scholars, artists, but also people beyond academia contribute to the collective production of knowledge that we then develop in CTS. I mean, by the way, CTS, I mean critical terrorism studies. And thinking collectively is also acknowledging that learning it's mutual rather than this top-down hierarchical activity, which is so embedded in academia. And I think it also means to bring to the fore lived experiences that rarely are individualized experiences, but rather collective ones. For example, knowledge and experience of what it means to be part of a suspect community or a securitized group, or a group whose safety is ignored and lives are devaluated. So I think that thinking collectively in CTS already happens, but it is hard to value and to acknowledge it to the level that this happens. And I think that is more related to the neoliberal academia in which we live in. And I also think that these ways of knowing and thinking could be strengthened. But yeah, I guess that we can explore later.
Thank you so much, Itoit. Carlos?
Perhaps you need my microphone on.
Yeah,
okay.
Exactly.
I was saying that I would like to express the felicitations for this outstanding initiative and my gratitude for this kind invitation to participate in this launching section. Since I have 3 minutes, I will begin with the first question. What does it mean to think collectively today? And my dear colleagues, I will really push forward on these questions. For me, and I start by arguing that collectivity is not a sentiment or a synonym for co-authorship. I conceptualize it as an infrastructure of knowledge production. By infrastructure, I mean organizational, ethical, and technical arrangements that determine how we define problems, generate evidence, allocate credits, and address the public. When we embed the collectivity at this infrastructural level, 3 things shift at once. Our methods, our knowledge production, and our public interface. And our criteria for quality also shifts, not elegance of critique alone, but whether credit is redistributed, harm reduced, and access is widened. Why insist on this? Critical terrorism and security studies already recognize that knowledge is already co-opted because political economy shapes what we see and what we miss. Yet, just to mention Jarvis and listed, the field successive waves have too often left reflexivity in the preface, while conventional pipelines continue. So, if we think collectivity as an infrastructural question, the care and the researcher position and commitment become prior conditions of validity and not add-on after method, but a precondition for it. In a field that is already saturated with the asymmetries of voice and risk. This is not our ornamental ethics, is moving from what we know and how we know. Further on, I will discuss why and suggest why these three arenas of change should occur: method, knowledge production, and public interface. So, having framing collectivity as a infrastructure, we can turn to the second questions beyond institutional collaborations or professional networks. Well, collectively, spaces do so when they are built as practice rooms rather than showcases. So, for instance, co-taught studios where roles and risks are negotiated, collaborative syllables that version ideas, open repositories for reusable protocols and codebooks, and more important, harm audit clinics that examine our own methods, and writing comments that record disagreement. So in doing so, I think routinized reflection, critique, and imagination could occur. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Carlos. Shirley? You're still muted, Shirley.
Yeah, thank you, Raquel and Alice, first of all, for inviting me here today to share my insights. I mean, and it's a big congratulations for you guys with the Iberian Network. I wish you all the best. I mean, it's a wonderful initiative. And sort of to see ways to collaborate. That is also something that I mean could really change a lot of people's perspective, you know, about counterterrorism. So just to reflect on the first question about thinking collectively, you know, for me, thinking collectively, for me, I see it as a way of including everybody in the conversation. I don't see it as an exclusionary process. I mean, it is about building bridges, you know, building bridges of thought, including people from the global south, people from the global north. Is about cross-border solidarities, bringing all these thoughts, you know, into one space and connecting scholars, you know, to speak about these things. For me, it is not just about speaking against the dominant narratives that we have and you know, that are there, I mean, in the space of terrorism, but he's also trying to speak between us, you know, not just against these narratives, you know, so as to generate these alternative ways of knowing and even imagining how security can be done, you know, and given my positionality, as an African, and I'm very excited, you know, to be invited here as well, you know, to just share from an African perspective, you know, what this actually means, you know, because the African way of life, we look at things through the lenses of Ubuntu, you know, which is a philosophy that guides the way the African perceives life and the way we do life. So Ubuntu, which actually means I am because we are, you know, it is not just an ontological, you know, a stance. It is also an epistemological, you know, way of looking, you know, at knowledge, you know, because it reframes, I mean, what it means to be and also to know, you know, and also how to act within this space, because we find that in many Western academic traditions, knowledge production is seen often as the work of individual intellect, you know. It's all about me and how I'm doing in this space, you know, how I'm getting the promotions, how I am getting this. But I mean, when you start looking at things through the lenses of Ubuntu, then we invite, you know, a shift from I know then we go to we know collectively, all of us in this space, valuing interdependence over this spirit of independence of just me, and shaping our scholarly identities collectively together. Then we get to understand that our critical insights are not diminished, but are deepened by coming together collectively in these spaces. So this actually reframes the collective work, of these networks that we're trying to build, bringing our thoughts together to sort of understand, terrorism, whether it's security studies, from the premise of we all know, therefore we bring our knowledges together. It's also about acknowledging our positionalities, our vulnerabilities as well, shaping our analysis in these very critical spaces. So I think for me, thinking collectively is not just a matter of, of looking back, because of course, given my African perspective, then we have to look back at all the things that happened, of course, even with colonialism. Then we look in, but also we look out and we look ahead, to finally shape our thoughts and see how we can actually come together, maybe by setting up things such as, reading groups, workshops, these mutual care networks, which in the African Network of Critical Security scholars, we've actually managed to do that, because we have developed something that is known as the critical security reading cycle, whereby we bring about this intellectual, we create an intellectual space for scholars to come together and sort of read and understand articles that are related to critical security studies and critical terrorism studies, given that, of course, Africa is still at the margins when it comes to critical scholarship, because of the narratives that you're still regurgitating that are coming out from, outside the continent. But it's a mutual space, it's a vibrant space to bring about all these dialogic forms of scholarship, through participatory workshops, bringing our ideas together as well, of course, with the thought of Ubuntu at the back of our minds, because it is about all of us, whether you're from the global north, whether you're from the global south. I mean, it's a space of learning guided by epistemic humility that nobody owns. Nobody has the monopoly of knowledge. We all learn from each other, and I mean, as we move through these spaces, then we get to have create that very stimulating environment of, of learning, and not just thinking collectively, but also learning collectively from our rich backgrounds, and I'm very happy that I'm in this space as well. I'll learn something, of course, from your side of the Iberian Peninsula, and of course, even your nuance and your perspectives there can help to shape, the network that we also have here on critical terrorism studies. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Shirley. And now Ines, last but not least.
Thank you. Thank you, Alice. Thank you, Raquel. Thank you to my fellow panelists. It's very nice to be here. So these are very hard questions. I hope you realize that you did not give us any easy, any easy talking points. I think for me, when it comes to collectivity, there's two things that comes in mind. And maybe this, just bear with me, will make sense, I promise. One is historical collectivity. So how are we related to our own past? How aware are we of our own past? And I think when it comes to critical reflections to terrorism, on terrorism in Spain, the answer is that we're not very united with our past. We're not very aware, we're not in tune with the history of what terrorism has been, who has been the terrorist, who's been the ones designating the terrorist in Spain. And so I think this is a wonderful sort of like move to contextualize our conceptualizations of terrorism, which has been undertaken in other countries to wonderful effect. I'm thinking about the UK case, thinking about France. Maybe this is something that we still have some work to do in the Iberian Peninsula. Not to say that there's no previous work on this. Of course, there is fantastic work on this, but I feel like this is still somewhat in the margins, even within critical terrorism studies. This idea of historicism, of trying to also track these changes and track how society is changing and like what is the connection there. So one thing is that, and I think about this a lot because when I'm teaching and when I'm lecturing, I find that students really they like this perspective. They like seeing where things come from and connecting that to what they have nowadays. And I feel like there's a type of collectivity in this regard, a historical one. Like we should not just consider the structures of today and how the system of power of today create and reproduce types of violence, but how the systems of power, they're not sprouting out of nowhere, right? They are coming out of a historical process. So that's one aspect of collectivity. And I guess the other one is, I subscribe, by the way, everything that my colleagues have said before about the field and about talking across the field to other terrorism scholars. But I think for me, in this regard, collectivity would also be my students, because these are the people I can influence. Politicians, they're very rarely going to listen to me or want to listen to me. But my students actually do want to listen to me, and they're very interested, and they have many vital points. So I feel like there is something that we shouldn't forget, is that what is the purpose of being a critical terrorism studies scholar? And the purpose is not to be, in my opinion, is not to be more right or more righteous than the orthodox scholars, is to introduce questions, to sort of like make these discussions relevant for real life, and to embed them into real life political strife and political struggles. So I think that students are a wonderful way of connecting and disseminating our work, and it's a very slow process, but you can sort of like brainwash them a bit. You can radicalize them a bit against the mainstream, and it just, you can, or I always tell them like, look guys, I'm radicalizing you to ask questions, to never take any of these definitions or assessments as a given, but as something that is negotiated, that is the process, the result of a process. And it's up to you to, say, hey, I don't agree with this, and to face this when you then go out into the world, in your workplace, with your family, with your friends. So I think there is also a larger, maybe more esoterical collectivity to be found also in the other people that we touch with our work, not just other academics, which is incredibly important, but on that I have nothing else to add. So yeah, those would be my reflections.
Thank you so much, Ines. This is a really fantastic first round with a lot of food for thought. But yeah, without further ado, and also to leave time for the audience to ask questions, let's go to our second round. So, which is about imagining the future of critical terrorism and security studies through collectivity. So we just had all these amazing reflections on collectivity. And the question now is how then we might transform the future of critical terrorism and security studies through this collective way of thinking and working, right? So you mentioned different issues, different dimensions, different levels of collectivity, but how can this actually transform the future of critical terrorism and security studies? So what kinds of research, teaching, political practices could emerge from a more collective, situated, and connected field? And I think this is a very practical question, right? So the first one was more imaginings and reflections, and here is really, okay, so, but how can this happen in practice? And we would love to hear from you on this. So maybe we start again in the same order, so we kind of give some relief to the ones that just spoke. Itoids.
Okay, well, so apologies for being maybe the most pessimistic one, but I'm quite skeptical that CTS or any other academic field or academia generally will change anytime soon, at least in the UK or Europe, which is the academia I know. So I'm thinking of what gets funded, what voices are considered knowledgeable and worth listening to, and what is allowed to be said and thought, and how certain people and ideas get rewarded while others get ignored or even punished. So I really doubt this will change anytime soon. But that said, I think that if ways of thinking and working change in any way, if a more collective way of working gets adopted or invented, I think this would perhaps transform CTS into a more action-oriented field. CTS and critical security studies, I think they are brilliant critical fields, but as I think Carlos and Shirley mentioned earlier, that so I think often in this field we get kind of paralyzed into diagnosing and identifying or analyzing problematic issues or phenomena without proposing alternatives or taking this criticism into action, which I think is often a problem in academia in general. But I think in CTS this challenge is bigger, because it would often involve going against powerful agents and institutions, against state-centric hegemonic security narratives and processes, against the structures of domination and power relation, against the powerful discourse of terrorism. So many academics want to see themselves involved in serious trouble. But I think there are other ways of action that maybe might be more manageable, like transforming more traditional methodologies, as my colleagues previously mentioned, into methods of co-production and collaboration with people outside of academia, opening the academic doors to marginalized voices, amplifying those experiences, knowledges, and demands. So about concrete actions. So when it comes to research, I think a key would be to design more participatory and collaborative research, as we already said before. So instead of studying subjects, research would involve designing projects with those affected by discriminative national security projects, practices, for example, but also employing more critical methodologies, as Shirley already mentioned, feminist methodologies that focus on embodied knowledge and that make us reflect on our positionality as researchers and question the impact of our work, how our work might reproduce existing inequalities or contributes to resist certain power relations. And in teaching, so something more concrete, I imagine inviting speakers from outside of academia to listen to their work and lived experiences, valuing their expertise, which I think this is a big problem in academia generally, and encouraging students to reflect in group. So trying to transform classrooms into critical spaces of collective reflection, as others already mentioned. And also, I think that encouraging students to participate with local groups, to get involved outside of academia, share what they are learning, but also, so be more critical into how knowledge is produced and what are the impacts. So maybe, I don't know, some open access public blogs or other creative projects that they could do. So yeah, I'm gonna leave it there.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Itoit. Carlos?
Now I have to turn on my microphone. Yes, thank you. My intervention goes online what I've previously mentioned. So if collectivity becomes ordinary, in fact, some transformations should occur. Just to name something, for instance, method sections cease to perform neutrality instead of document shared, and reversible decisions, namely who shaped established problems definitions, how sampling and coding were negotiated to trigger protocols. From this, I think if this transformations equaled, we could see multi-seated and co-produced studies, as our previous colleague noted, with version protocols and tiered data accessed, co-governed with the communities. So it's very important to involve all in this process in different perspectives and different backgrounds. Second, teaching would shift towards studio formats co-led with partners, where assessment culminates in public briefs and living archives, rather than solely in terms of papers. And third, political practice will reorient towards care-centered responsivenesses. For example, rapid review cells producing accessible evidence toolkits for civil society. Take all these together, these developments substantiate embodied reciprocal knowledge production and to render accessibility operational in the field's next phase. We all know that the shift from aspiration to practice has occurred when three distributions are both visible and tractable across projects. I mean, the changes in methodology, the way we produce knowledge, and the way we interact with the public. And second, it's very important to reduce harm for those who live with its consequences. And third, access widened for those who use beyond the university. Once these become ordinary facts rather than exceptional claims, collectivity will signify not hoped for a virtue, but a set of infrastructures that we reliably will maintain. Thank you.
Thank you, Carlos. Shirley.
Thank you, Raquel, again. I mean, I just as I think Ito, as I mentioned, she said that she's taking a bit of a pessimistic view. Maybe I could bring in a dose of optimism to the session a bit, but I understand, of course, it's not an easy process. We all know how difficult, this journey, of critical terrorism studies, especially, and security studies, given the state centrism that is involved in these discourses. And I mean, from where I stand, for me, I come from the, positionality, of exposing and resisting, these knowledge systems. I think we still have a long way to go in terms of, coming together and resisting these knowledge systems that continue to, dehumanize people, diminish them, and sort of bring in these perspectives that elevate collective and promote lived knowledges and experiences. And I believe this will require a good dose of courage, as it obviously demands, boldness to tread a path that for sure is quite radical. And I mean, I began with the premise that, the way as an African we look at Ubuntu, because Ubuntu is seen as as peaceful, as, walking this path of peace, walking this path that brings everybody together. But Ubuntu, on the flip side, again, is a radical ontology, it really fights injustice, So for me, I mean, what will emerge from a critical terrorism or critical security studies network, or this sort of collective thinking, I see a lot of resistance coming out of this, resistance of thought and refusing, to be put, to be boxed under this, these perspectives that are dominant and hegemonical that continue to diminish critical thought. So there's a lot of work anyway to be done on this front. I mean, confronting global hierarchies is not an easy process. Confronting as well the matrix of coloniality that continues even to plague, for example, the continent of Africa. I mean, because for us it's multiple layers of things that the African continent, of course, has to deal with, including the colonial question, or the colonial legacies that sometimes even critical terrorism studies has not engaged with quite effectively or quite expansively. But these are the thoughts that we continue to have, and bringing in the idea as well of decolonial terrorism, studies to sort of bring in this pluriversality of thought, because as I said in the beginning, nobody holds a monopoly of knowledge, You're still learning from different contexts. And of course, when you speak about terrorism, we are coming from different contexts. And these people in the different contexts, of course, have been affected and are still being affected quite differently from others who are, in different maybe geographical spaces. But what would emerge for me is a broad imagination, a space, not a homogeneous space, but more of a heterogeneous, interconnected space that will have some sort of, intellectual creativity, because even for terrorism studies, the other day I was just interacting with one colleague who mentioned something very interesting by saying that, because in the criminal justice space, he's going for a fellowship, and the fellowship is the partner in the fellowship. His partner in the fellowship is someone from, an anthropology space, and they're collaborating on a project. And you were saying, the next time maybe I will look for a professor in the arts, in music, to sort of see how we can merge these ideas together and produce something meaningful. So within terrorism studies, security studies, there are a lot of collaborations. There's a lot of learning for us to do, of course, guided by the ethos of, humility, to sort of open ourselves up and recognize that there's no single scholar, of course, and there's no single, discipline or no single region that actually holds a monopoly on critical insight. And this could lead to creation of spaces of shared reflection. Through seminars where we invite a lot of people from different contexts to sort of share the perspective and enrich the discussions, since COVID, everything has been made a bit easy, with the digital platforms. We can meet people from different areas and sort of listen to their stories, and sort of enrich, the discussions and enrich our thoughts in this area, which I believe we still have, we've not fully reached the level that we want to reach. Within even critical terrorism studies, there's still a lot of engagement to do with scholars coming out of, especially from the decolonial side of things. There's still a lot of work to be done to sort of merge ourselves, and merge with other scholars coming from, different contexts, because of, as I said in the beginning, for me, it's about Ubuntu. At the end of the day, we are all human, Humanity stands tall above everything else. So bringing all these ideas, because we are all human, and sort of looking at ways to improve, the security situation, that is, wreaking havoc in different contexts. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Shirley. Really, really interesting. Ines?
Thank you. I mean, the good thing about being last and the bad thing about being last is that all the good points were made. So I'm free to make whatever point I want. You can't blame me. No, just kidding. Where to start? The future of CTS and, what is our role in this? I mean, I subscribe to Itoi's vision that academia is just not that relevant in the world. Sadly, like our work function is this very close cycle loops, and we can influence the loop, but it's very hard to influence anything outside of the loop. I think once again, the thing we can influence most directly are our students, for all those of us who lecture, but also civil society at large. So if you're a person who is taking some time out of their academic work to talk to civil society, to go to certain events, to provide expertise on demand to people who may need it, I think that's the impact we should be aiming for. I think there's something good relatively about the world being on fire, is that people are aware that the world is on fire. Like I think the youth, broadly speaking, and I include all of us because we look very youthful, we see that things are getting worse. And so suddenly these arguments about structures of power and systems of oppression and how you were never meant to win this game was not for you from the beginning, these concepts that maybe were a bit more extreme or radical 20 years ago are very obvious nowadays to a lot of people that perhaps before they were insulated by the system, and they no longer are, and they're experiencing all of these negative effects in a way that other people have. So I think there's a certain inclination on parts of our students to resonate with these critical perspectives more so nowadays, because they are very hyper aware of the conditions of the world in terms of increasing inequality, in terms of climate change, in terms of violent repression of protest. So I don't put a lot of stock on our published work, but I put a lot of stock on our interactions with other people. So when we talk to students, but also when we talk to people outside of ourselves. So if you ask me, what do I think that us as a network or any critical security network should do, is to talk to people outside of academia. Because I mean, I'm convinced, you are convinced, people who edit our journals are convinced, and people who are not convinced, they have a vested interest in not being convinced, so they simply will not be. So do we keep shouting at those people? Do they even, what is the result that we want from that? I mean, I'm not saying it's useless. There is a purpose in intradisciplinary debate, but I do think at this point we've reached critical mass. And for me, the thing to be gained, it's in crossing that boundary and interacting more with grassroots activists, for example, people who work on everyday social, who work with the results of everyday systems of oppression at the social level. Not saying that it's easy, not saying that our careers are geared for this. So this needs to be a very sort of case by case, how much of my time can I give to this? Because the system is definitely not helping me do any of these things. So yeah, it's not pessimist, it's not optimist, it's, I don't know, realist maybe.
Thank you so much, Ines. You really make me laugh because, yeah, I think it's the spectrum, right? And we kind of move in the spectrum. And yeah, thank you so much for all your contributions. I think we have really a lot to think here. I'm really happy that a lot of you touched on the issue of participatory research, co-design research, shifting or trying at least to shift power relations in how we do research. And that's, for sure a mark of critical security and terrorism studies, doing it as much as we can, also teaching critically and radically. I agree with you that this is for sure something key in what we're doing. This engagement with engagement outside of academia, but also thinking in terms of infrastructures, right? And I know some of you said, oh, we won't be able to change any of this, and others were more like, we actually need to work on the infrastructure and start there. But this is what interesting is all this, the complementarity of these approaches and how can we work together. And even if we just, you know, in my view, do small dents on wherever we are and wherever we're working at, I think that's already a very big thing. Because, you know, I know that in terms of practices, we always feel as critical scholars that we're working against the grain. I know, right? I feel it every day that we're kind of, you know, we keep at it and we are, you know, undervalued. We don't get grants. We don't, you know, publishing is hard outside of the typical journals that are critical with critical people. But that's also why I think we also need to be in places. And I think that's a challenge for us here, just in the roundtable, but also the people in the audience, and I think for the network, because if we keep sending our applications, you know, to, you know, whatever funding we send them to, but if there's no critical people in those panels, you know, it's very easy that we are put on the side, right? Because we are not we're not understood, we're not well evaluated. So yeah, I think we need to be in places and we need to make that effort. And I know it's awful because I don't want to be in those places either and spend my time. But I think that's, you know, it's part of the infrastructure that Carlos was talking about, but also it's part of this pluriversality that Shirley was talking about, right? We need this plurality of voices, of contexts, of, you know, intersectionalities in the different places to actually try, you know, to do something in a critical way.